Lisa Witter is joining me. She is a co-founder of a company called Apolitical, which is basically software and community for government people. It's both for civil servants, of which there are 200 million around the world, she explained to me, and also policymakers, of which maybe that's part of the 200 million. But so what's the problem that you set out to solve with Apolitical?
Well, we thought it was crazy. Hi, everyone, by the way. We thought it was crazy in 2015 that it was easier for a public servant to find a lump in a mattress at a hotel they were going at via TripAdvisor than they could find a lump in a policy. And the truth is that most people in government around the world are solving the same problem. So what would happen is they'd recreate the wheel over and over again. And the number one way they were recreating that wheel was they were Googling, how do I solve AI problems in my government? And they weren't getting things, literally to this day, that's the number one way that governments solve problems, policy problems, is they Google it. So we wanted to solve that problem with a business model behind it.
And what is possible if the problem is solved? I mean, you know, how bad is it? And talk about what's happened so far. Give us a little bit of the chronology of the company and where you've taken it.
So we started off early 2014, and we could feel this crush of cynicism going on in citizens about government being a force for good. Now, we're all sitting here in the United States. I live in Germany. We're a global company. You know that how people are feeling about government now. Although things are changing just a bit. I think the midterms, no matter what your political persuasion is, there's this like hope that democracy might have an opportunity. So we wanted to start off by just telling stories about what was working in government, because mainstream's media role is not to talk about what's working in government, what is it? It's to talk about what's not working in government. So we started off telling that story, and lo and behold, very quickly as we were doing that, folks in government said, oh my God, I have never heard of a place where I can go find out A, what's working in government, and B, that actually celebrates people in government. So as the company grew and we worked on sort of monetization and how to do all that work, because they're a hardcore technology company as well that has content as part of it, these really pioneering civil servants, public servants said to us, it's great that you're curating ecosystems around how governments are using AI or what's going on in blockchain or how to solve violence against women, but we need to and want to learn better. And basically, most people in government are thrown into the deep end. They move from the Ministry of Transportation to the Ministry of Finance, and they know very little about those things. They tend to be administrators. So now we have 170 countries using us right now to do deep learning and exchange.
So it's really, it's kind of like a publishing platform for government employees, right?
It's a learning platform for government employees.
So they can help each other?
They help each other. And what was super interesting is we opened it up to user-generated content because we thought, okay, we'll start off by doing the curation. And they said, that's great. But when we said, hey, you can write. And by the way, every single investor said, oh, people in government are never, they would laugh at us saying, oh, you want to build a platform for innovators in government? All two of them? You know, there are massively innovative people in government.
That's what the Americans said anyway.
Yeah, that's what the Americans said. I have a stand-up thing I'm working on about all the funny jokes people said to us when we were starting. We wanted to make politics and policy sexy again. So coming soon, maybe I can come back and do a stand-up routine for you guys on government and politics. So it's funny. So what they said is like we need more. You know, we want to go deeper, and we're willing to pay for it, and we want to learn from our peers more than we want to learn from the World Bank. Because, or some random, you know, academic, hopefully there's not too many academics who don't write in the context of, I've been through that political place before. We have folks from governments, from ministers to former prime ministers to digital like natives coming in, writing saying, this was my experience, this is what worked, this what could be better, and everyone said that will never happen. So we're basically open sourcing, crowdsourcing, the largest driver of democracy, but also economies in the world. I mean, government spends 40% of its GDP on government itself. So just think, if you're interested in force multipliers and where the big money's at, this is the new frontier, and you're seeing that with the growth of GovTech.
Well, you are a tech company, but also we're at a time when technology is transforming society at a pace that government is not easily able to deal with. Is that part of the reason why now is the time for what you're doing?
It's the perfect time. I mean, I just want to say, remember, government is what? Government are people. And most of us, as we were just hearing about cybersecurity, we're all trying to figure out what the hell this means for us. The difference is that you and I aren't responsible for millions and millions of people as we're making our decisions day to day. Hopefully that's going to change for me soon, but we're not. So oftentimes, right now, everyone's sort of going at it alone. And the real igniting force to what we're doing, besides this sense of possibility and optimism, is the fact that we're all going through this together and they don't know. We get little emails from people saying, hey, I just got moved from Department of Indigenous Affairs over to Department of Urban Planning, and I'm in charge of the IoT. What is IoT? Literally, I don't know what IoT is. We're like, okay, it's Internet of Things, and here are 5 other governments that have done something on IoT. We early days got an email from someone we have a concierge service for people in government. So we're learning what folks in government want so we can automate it with bots and all the things that you would do. And someone said, oh, I hear Estonia is doing stuff in the cloud. Our government cybersecurity people say there's no way we can do it in the cloud. Well, if Estonia's done it, maybe. So all these connections are happening.
What are some other specific issues that people need help with because they're changing so fast?
So one really exciting thing that's going on is New Zealand is doing machine-readable changing law into machine-readable code. So because we need to know what's going on and be much more agile about changes, oftentimes you just sit in a room and you read really long files. So governments are sort of learning from each other. New Zealand is leading the way. That's a big one. The things that I sit on, and David and I have an affiliation with the World Economic Forum, and I co-chair the Agile Governance Council. And the Fourth Industrial Revolution, whether you like that term or not, that is a big driver for all of this. So what happens if I'm sitting in a city and all of a sudden 4 law firms open their doors and they have robots, they have AI that's doing that? What do I do as a mayor? Do I kick that up? Who else has done that? So all of these sort of new frontiers, but even in the old frontiers, there are new companies that are solving old problems in new ways, which is why we've built a GovTech hub to really help connect. This is at the demand. We're built by and for government. We listen to these folks a lot. They said, it's not enough to know how to solve policy issues. We have to know, and the theme of this stage has been public-private partnership. Who do I go work with that can do things better, faster, cheaper, and with a social screen, which is really interesting. Like the UK government right now is giving extra points to companies who actually care. Now, think about it. The global procurement spend is $8 trillion.
Government procurement.
Of government procurement. We are not going to get anywhere close to solving SDGs if we don't figure out how to move that government spend. Not to sort of mention that as an entrepreneur, that's a really big market size that you can tap a percentage of. So we've built into our business model impact and profitability. And the good thing is about being a European company is we've been forced to, we couldn't monetize what a minister would click on. No one would ever use that. Plus with GDPR, which has been a hiccup for many of us because you can't blast email market, it's a signaling to our customers that trust is really important, and it's been a real benefit. Like the heart of it has been a big benefit to our growth.
But now, you're an American living in Berlin, starting a global company for government people. The U.S. is a huge market, but I think Americans, and I would not be too surprised if the vast majority of people in this room are very cynical about government's capacity to absorb change, to deal with change. But you're now finally coming into the U.S. Talk about how the U.S. sits in this, if it's a movement, I would like to think it's a movement of, digitizing government. And what are you doing to help with that?
Well, it's a massive movement with a minimum $400 million price tag and 100. It's really driven by a lot of the tech companies here.
What's the 400? What is that?
That's the GovTech procurement spend. So just
GovTech.
Yeah. So there's a massive movement, and it's being moved by the fact that governments are having to do more with less, so they have to save money. Plus, remember, workforces change, and young people are going into government saying, "WTF? It's crazy that I can't use these tools." So when we went to found the company, it's myself and another woman. Everyone said to us, I'm an entrepreneur. Coming to the U.S. is a cool place to do. I lived in New York City for a long time. I'm from the West Coast, Seattle, But people said this was before Cambridge Analytica. Whatever you do, do not start this company in the U.S. because if you want to be a global company that works with governments, if you have data, if you're an American company, no one will trust you. So build the company abroad and then bring it back to the U.S. Now, I would say that, and now we're spending more time back in the U.S., there's this sort of hope that whether you like government or not, it's here. And I think we want it.
Isn't that shocking that even has to be
I
said,
think we
but
want it, and many of you probably want it to be the smallest and most efficient possible, right? Like that's at least the American dream. And so with technology, we're able to, in exchange, that's exactly what people are talking about. We were talking to a high-level government official on the West Coast who said to herself how she motivates her team. She says, this is a Churchill quote, we're out of money, now we have to use our heads. And we are a collective head for governments around the world. And they pay to use us, companies pay to engage, and in the end, we make people's lives better. I think it's a damn cool business model. We're really excited about it.
I certainly hope it continues to succeed. Now, I want to go to audience in a second, but you do have a woman co-founder, and you wrote a book, which I didn't even quote as I was introducing you, called The She Spot, Why Women Are the Market for Changing the World and How to Reach Them. Now, that's not directly related to what you're doing, or is it? How do you feel about it? I mean, go to your website, it seems like the vast majority of your senior leadership is women. What does that mean to you, and why has it helped?
Well, on very much the plus side of all of this, government officials, when we sit down to do deals with them or talk with them, the fact that we're two women, they say, oh, we can trust you with a technology company. There's this sense of oh, you're not going to screw us, are you? So
because you're women.
Just because they're women, I'd like to think it's our ethics and our values and our reputation as well. But we walk in with that as an advantage, and I think that is a hidden advantage. I will say the downside is, if you're trying to build a company that has market rate returns that also happens to do good, completely aligned, oftentimes people are like, oh, you're women, you must people have said, why didn't you create a nonprofit? So there's a plus side and the negative side, but to the people who are at the core of what we're doing, it's been a real advantage.
That's really good. Okay, who's got anything to ask to Lisa here? Government tech.
Not all at once.
Okay.
Any optimism, yeah.
Okay, here. Identify yourself. There's a mic coming. Caitlin is running. Caitlin is intrepid. Thank you, Caitlin.
Hi, it's Larry Weber. What about voting technologies? What are you seeing being asked? What do you see being developed? Simple question.
Well, the cool part about my job in our company is we get a bird's eye view of every single policy topic you can imagine. And I would say voting technologies is at the top of many democracies lists, particularly in the European Union right now. How do you use tech? How do you make sure it's not hacked? I don't have any here are 3 trends that are happening, but democracy in general, how do you make it better, faster, and more accessible and more equitable is a big question you get from government.
Oh, okay, here.
Thanks. Hi, Chris Mondini from ICANN.
Hi.
How do you keep policy advice that government employees might get through your platform neutral? Because different policy advice might have different
Hey, it's
impacts that people
Apolitical.
want.
That's the name of the company.
Well, so what are the mechanisms to sort of keep bias out of the advice?
Yeah, and why did you call it apolitical?
Yeah, well, we wanted to look, I'm not naive, none of you are naive. There's no such thing as entirely apolitical because their biases are subconscious. That's why we have racism and sexism, right? But what we try to do is say, look, so much of what policy is not political. You hear about the political stuff at the top of the pyramid because that's the sexy stuff that gets the headlines. But so much of policy is actually not apolitical. So we're not the arbiters of what is political and what's not political. We're the platform to do that. So we don't go through and say, oh, that's a good idea, that's a bad idea. This is where you open source and crowdsource amongst people in government, and they get to decide.
Yeah, good.
Mei Lin Fang, People-Centered Internet, but I'm originally from Singapore. So Singapore spends 5% of GDP per capita GDP on health, and the US spends 18%. Do you see a role for apolitical to do some sort of helping people learn from each other in that kind of macro way?
We absolutely do. I mean, that's the core. That's the core of what we do is, hey, how did you do this? What didn't you do that was different? I spent a lot of time with Singaporeans because they are very progressive, very digital, out front on a lot of, self-driving cars and test beds and sandboxes and all these geeky things if anyone wants to talk about how government are testing new technologies. And the interesting thing about Singapore is their whole theme is being high tech and high touch. And this is the real cautionary tale about technology. My background is behavioral science. This is what my book is about, and brain science. And it's very easy for governments to fall in love with technology to solve all the problems. But where trust sits, when you have trust, is a function of proximity. And Singapore, luckily they're a small island, really spends a lot of time being very, very close to the people. And what I hear from people in government is, how do we use technology to make things better but not lose that human touch? And one part of Singapore that a lot of governments are looking at, they're kind of like everyone likes to go to Singapore and hang out with your government, is your civil servants are very well paid. And this is a conversation that happens in our country all the time, why they're being paid so much, and it's a very well-informed workforce. I mean, imagine, one of the things we find in talking to people in government is a lot of them are depressed. They call us the Prozac for public service. And I was listening to Scott at the very beginning talk about the importance of loneliness. The first year that we had our platform out, loneliness was the #1 search term on our platform. Imagine all the data we have about sort of what's going on. We put another survey out that just came back about how public servants want to learn. The #1 policy topic they're interested in is mental health at work.
Wow.
You cannot have a functioning government or a functioning society if the people who work in it aren't respected, given the skills, and feel good about their job. So we're trying to really unleash, humanizing these people who are in charge of many decisions in our lives. And Singapore does a very good job at that.
Well, you're doing a great job. It's something very important. So thank you so much for coming to tell us about it.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it, Liz.